Okay, good. We are ready to study Perashat Yitro. Actually, what I want to do is I want to discuss with you one of the most important principles of Judaism. It's a concept that repeats itself throughout the Torah. And even though it's one of the most important principles of Judaism, it is also one of the least known principles of Judaism, or certainly the least studied principle of Judaism. So if you go to, an average rabbinic scholar, oftentimes they may not have studied about this subject, at least not in a methodological fashion. And it's a pity because the alternative to this principle, and I'll tell you in a moment what this principle is, the question is, what is the foundation of Torah and Mitzvot? What is the foundation of Torah and Mitzvot? And usually people like to answer the question in terms of theology, right? So there's a theological aspect, and you devote yourself, you're devoted to the idea of Torah and Mitzvot, and it's that devotion that binds you to the Torah. And, that's fine for some people. For some people, it's fine, not for everybody, right? Because not everybody is interested in theology. And there's a bigger problem with the theological approach. The bigger problem with theological approach is that Judaism is not a theological system. And I want to be careful because I want you to understand this properly. I don't mean to say that Judaism is devoid of any theological aspects. That is incorrect. Of course, there are many theological aspects to Judaism. But I mean to say that the foundation of Judaism is not theological. And theology is kind of it's an aspect of Judaism. It's not the primary aspect of Judaism. So it's not only that theology doesn't speak to everybody, and therefore it's a mistake to tie Judaism to theology, but it's just a mistake because it's incorrect, right? So what I want to do tonight is to explain, well, what is the foundation of Torah and Mitzvot? And the answer is the Berit, the covenant. And the Berit is discussed at length in Perashat Yitro. The Berit is discussed at length in Perashat Mishpatim. The Berit is discussed in Sefer Devarim. It's really a foundation that's repeated over and over and over again in the Torah. In the Nevi'im, it's repeated over and over again. So this is one of the most understudied subjects, while ironically, it's one of the most important subjects. And what constitutes the Jewish people, what constitutes us as a nation, is the Berit. And what's important about the Berit or the covenant, is that it was bilateral. It was contracted freely between two parties, God and the Jewish people. And it wasn't imposed. It wasn't imposed by the Jewish people upon God, nor was it imposed by God upon the Jewish people. That's really important to understand that. And I know the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat of Perchet Amud Aleph. I know the Gemara, and one day maybe we'll study the Gemara. There's a Gemara that says Kafa Aleim Har Kigigit. Whatever that Gemara means, and it's a very important Gemara, Chas v'shalom, I'm not coming to minimize that Gemara, of course not. But we have the Pesukim before us. We know what the Pesukim say. We understand what the Berit is. We know Jewish law. We understand the way the system works. So my goal here is not to teach that Gemara, notwithstanding that it is an important Gemara, but that's a separate subject. I'm not going to teach it tonight. My goal here is to read the Pesukim and understand the Pesukim. So let's start, and let me ask a question. So the Berit is a covenant. A covenant is a legally binding document, agreement. so two parties can enter into an agreement. And in Jewish law, for an agreement to be binding, you need to have, well, you need to have a few things, but two important things you need in the document are time and place. By time, I mean date. I mean date and place. So as you know, I'm an attorney. I'm always doing these, various contracts, and we're setting up companies in different places in the world, and it's really annoying because you got to prepare these resolutions, and you got to sign them, and you have to date them properly, and they have to say where they signed them, and if they didn't write where the place where they signed them, at least under German law, for example, just give me one example. Under German law, when you sign the resolution, you have to say the time, a date, and the place, right? So this is common. This is just a description of many legal systems that for a document to be legally binding, you need to have those two things, and you have it here. And by the way, this is everything we're studying tonight is from my father's Horizontal Society, which is just a phenomenal book. I mean, it really, if you want to understand Judaism, that's the book. I mean, there's a lot of great things he wrote, but that book is like, it just totally opens up the windows, and now you can see outside, and you can see the world, and you can understand things. That's a beautiful thing about that book. But I want to read to you the first pasuk in this week's Perashat, which describes the story of Har Sinai, because as you know, this week's Perashat is divided into two parts. The first part is the story of Yitro, and the whole idea of Moshe Rabbeinu appointing other leaders to help him, other shofetim to help him. That's one part of the Perashat. We're not studying with that, but we're going to study the other part of the Perashat. The other part of the Perashat deals with Har Sinai. And the first pasuk in that part of the Perashat is B'chodesh hashelishi lesed bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim. This happens on the first day of the third month, right after the Jewish people left Egypt. Bayom hazeh, on this very day. And what does it say? So it gives us the date. And the pasuk continues, and it says, Ba'u midbar Sinai. On that very day, the Jewish people arrived at the Sinai desert. So you see how the Torah sets it up? This is law. We follow the rules. The governing relationship between God and the Jewish people will be within the framework of Jewish law. So we have the date and we have the place. And the pasuk says, "Vayachanu b'midbar." We arrive before this mountain. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar. We arrive and we are now encamped in front of the mountain. The mountain is Har Sinai. That happens to be the same mountain that Moses, a year or so earlier, when he was shepherding Yitro's flock, the flock went up the mountain and he came after it, and eventually he reaches the place where he sees the Seneh Boer, he sees the burning bush. That's this mountain. That's this mountain. So now we have the first part. Okay, next. What do you need for a contract to be binding? Okay, we dealt with the formalities, time and place. What do you need for a contract to be binding? Every lawyer knows that for a contract to be binding, you need an offer and you need an acceptance. And this Perashat Yitro, it describes the offer and it describes the acceptance. So let's read these pesukim. I think I'm going to do is, what I'll do is let me find the pesukim. Give me a moment. I will open up the pesukim, and so like that you can all see them while I read them. Okay, so let me see if I can find it here. I think it's here. Give me a moment. Perek Yotet, right? Yes. Okay. I'm now going to do a share screen. Just bear with me. Okay. Okay. If I'm not mistaken, you should all now be able to see the screen with the pesukim. Yeah? All right. All right. Okay. ומשה עלה אל האלוהים ויקרא אליו אדוני מן ההר לאמור כה תאמר לבית יעקב ותגד לבני ישראל. Every pasuk here, every word here is rich with meaning. I do not mean chas v'shalom to read the pesukim quickly, implying, oh, there's nothing to see here. There's a lot to see in every single word, but I have a specific goal. So please don't misunderstand me going through the pesukim with that specific goal in mind. God calls Moshe Rabbeinu, he calls him up the mountain, and he says, I want you to make the following proposal before the Jewish people. This is going to be that part of the contract negotiation that we call the offer. Here is the offer that I'm going to be making. Atem Reitem asher asiti lemisraim. You all experienced what I did to the Egyptians. You all know who I am. And I have now brought you here on the wings of the Nesharim. Nesharim is actually it's actually the correct explanation was given by the famous legendary Felix from Bar Ilan University. He says it's actually a griffin vulture. And here is a proposal. If you're going to be very careful, pay attention and follow my instructions carefully, diligently, and you are willing to accept, literally guard the berit, I want you to be, I am going to make you a special nation among all the nations of the world. That's a proposal. I'm going to give you certain laws. You have to follow these laws diligently, carefully. If you agree to follow these laws carefully, and in this way enter the berit, then I will make you a special nation among all the nations of the world. And here is what's going to make you special. Here's what's going to define you. So, for example, Russia was the founder of communism, right? Let me do unshare here. Russia was the founder of communism. So, what makes Russia special is the communist revolution. Okay. Cuba is special because not only did they follow the communist revolution, but they continued following communism, notwithstanding that it was proven as the most ridiculous, impotent, idiotic economic system ever devised, unless your goal was to make everybody in the country poor and a few people very, 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 very rich. If that's your goal, communism is great. So Cuba is the one country that said, we're sticking with this to the bitter end. America is the country that invented capitalism and showed how great capitalism is, and now is stupidly following the lead of Cuba. There was recently a proposal by Elizabeth Warren that involves confiscation of private property of people who have greater than $20 million a year. I'm not making this up. We have to confiscate 2% of their assets every single year. Confiscation of property. Does that sound familiar to anybody? To confiscate private property by the government. Oh yeah, that's communism. So anyway, every country has something special. What's going to make the Jewish people special is we're going to be the Mamlechet Kohanim. Let me explain this to you. What is the Mamlechet Kohanim? This is part of the Berit. So to understand the deal, you have to understand the terms of the deal. I want to make you the Mamlechet Kohanim V'Choy Kadosh. So the Mamlechet Kohanim is explained by the B. Eliyahu ben Amozeg beautifully, one of the great Chachamim from Livorno, 19th century, not too long ago. Also a very unknown Chacham, very sad that people don't study the Eliyahu ben Amozeg more. Now in Israel, there are some rabbis who are beginning to publish his books, and that's great. My father and I used to study Eliyahu ben Amozeg on a regular basis every Friday night. So he says, what is Mamlechet Kohanim? So what are Kohanim? Kohanim are the priests of the Jewish people. So they're the ones who teach Torah to the nation. The Kohanim are the ones who worship in the Bet HaMikdash. The people come to the Bet HaMikdash, and the Kohanim through the services in the Bet HaMikdash, they bring certain harmony to the nation, they bring kaparat avonot to the nation, and they teach the nation how to come closer to the proper worship of God. That's what Kohanim do. So when he says that you're going to be mamlechet Kohanim, it means that you are going to represent God to the nations of the world. You will be the Kohanim of humanity. And that's really important. So the job of the Jewish people is not just to be observant and insular. No, we're supposed to be observant of the Torah, but the Torah that we teach should bring about a change and a transformation in all of humanity. That's what we say, letaken olam b'malchut shaddai. We want to fix the world so that the entire world is under the governance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so that's Mamlechet Kohanim, B'Goy Kadosh, and we are holy in the sense that we have certain rules that apply to us that do not apply to the Goyim. For example, we cannot eat shrimp, we cannot eat lobster, we cannot eat octopus, or all these other beautiful French delicacies. We are constrained in what we are allowed to consume. And then there's prohibitions in terms of sexual morality. There's a lot of things that we're constrained. So we're Goy Kadosh. So you see the two things go hand in hand, right? Because we're a Goy Kadosh, we can also be a Mamlechet Kohanim. If you weren't a Goy Kadosh, you can't be Mamlechet Kohanim. That's the idea of the Berit. That's it. That's a proposal. And finally, Moshe Rabbeinu is told, Ele hadevarim asher teraber el bnei Yisrael. God tells Moses, go speak these words to the Jewish people, meaning make the proposal. I want you to make a formal proposal to the Jewish people. Okay, so that's step one. Step one is the let's call it the offer. If we're to use contract language, let's call it the offer. What's step two? Step two is Moshe Rabbeinu descending the mountain, going to the Jewish people, and presenting the offer to the Jewish people. And that's exactly what takes place. The pasuk says, "Vayavo Moshe vayikra leziknei ha'am," and he calls the elders of the people. Who are these elders? Why does he call the elders of the people? Who are they? The elders of the people, the zekenim, are the political representatives of the Jewish people empowered to represent their particular constituents. So every tribe had its representative. And then in the tribes, there was different mishpachot, there was different bet avot. Every bet av had its representatives. So these representatives were duly empowered by their constituents to hear the proposal from Moshe Rabbeinu. And they will be receiving this proposal. So Moshe Rabbeinu calls these zekanim. He calls the zekanim, "Vayasem lifnehem et kol hadevarim ha'ele asher sivahu Adonai," and he puts the words before them. They now hear the words clearly. There is no duress, none whatsoever. There's no iyumim, there's no threats. It's very businessman-like. Here's what I'd like to do. Do you want to do it? And the answer of the people, the zekanim go back to the people, and the answer of the pasuk says, "Vaya'anu chol ha'am yahda vayomeru." The entire nation together answer the following. Listen to the answer. Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh. Everything that was spoken by God, meaning all of the words that were presented in the offer, we accept. We accept these words. Because they could have theoretically said, I don't know, like we don't like this part. We don't want it. They could have said that. Well, let's try to negotiate back and forth, right? They didn't say that. No, actually said, we completely accept all the terms of the offer. So what's the next step? The next step is, now that the Jewish people accepted the offer, Moshe Rabbeinu has to go up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and tell God that the Jewish people have accepted the offer. And you see the formality here? Does God need Moses to tell him that the Jewish people have accepted the offer? Does he need that? He doesn't need that, does he? But we're talking about law. And if God is going to act as, God at this point, then people will be terrified and it's not going to be a real deal. So there's an actual formality. Moses represents God to the Jewish people, and he gives the Jewish people the words of God. And now Moses is going to represent the Jewish people to God. And he's going to deliver to God the words of the Jewish people. So you see how the legal formalities are essential. It's not a game. It's not just, people waiting kind of on a messy bus stop and nobody knows who got there first, like in the Tahana Merkazit in Tel Aviv. This is very orderly. This is very structured, and everything is done properly. And the pasuk says, "Vayashem Moshe divrei ha'am el Adonai." Moshe Rabbeinu delivers the words of the Jewish people to God. Okay, so up to now, we have the offer. We have the acceptance of the Jewish people. All right, so we're almost set to have the berit. The berit has not been entered into. I just want to be clear. It hasn't been entered into. There's been an offer. There's been an acceptance. The next step. What is the next step? The next step is going to be the revelation of God before the Jewish people. Okay? Now, here's the important thing. Why didn't God reveal himself when he made the offer? Why not reveal himself then? Why is he revealing himself afterwards? What do you think? Anybody have any theories?
Yeah.
Yes, Mikey.
Don't want it to come out of maybe fear and awe of just, I guess, the sight of the moment. That's overwhelming.
Because if God would have revealed, that's correct. If God would have revealed himself beforehand, the people would have been terrified. You're not going to say no. I mean, it's like, God is coming and revealing himself. Do you want to accept the Torah? And like, yeah, I think I'll do that. Like, okay, well, of course you can accept it. So God is he dissimulates himself.
Right.
Sends Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, you speak to them. If I speak to them, they'll be terrified. They wouldn't be able to handle it, right? That's not a free contract. How is that free? That would be a contract entered into under duress or under fear. So if somebody holds a gun to somebody's head and says, I want you to sign this agreement or I'll blow your brains out. I mean, of course, the person is going to sign, but is that contract binding? I don't think so. That's entered into under duress, under fear of threat of death. So that's why God dissimulates himself. He's behind the scenes. He says, Moses, you go to the Jewish people. Then when the Jewish people accept it, okay, the Jewish people tell Moses, now you go back to God. And in this way, there is zero threat. There's zero fear. The Jewish people are completely free to accept the berit or to reject the berit. And they choose to accept the berit. But now that they accepted it, now God can reveal himself, right? So I just want you to understand how the order of things is so essential to understand step by step by step. The order is absolutely essential. So when you hear the Perashat this week, you will understand what's happening in the Perashat. So now we get to the next step. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, הנה אנוכי בא אליך בעב הענן בעבור ישמע העם בדברי עמך ורמבך יאמינו לעולם. I want to now reveal myself to the Jewish people. But there's a purpose to this. I want to reveal myself to the Jewish people. I want them to experience me directly for a very specific purpose. And it is as follows. Ultimately, what is going to happen is that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be the one who receives the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and who then presents the Torah before the Jewish people. That's what's going to happen. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu is receiving the Torah, it is absolutely essential And there can be absolutely no doubt about Moshe Rabbeinu actually being the recipient of the Torah from God. Because if there is any doubt in that, then the whole system collapses. So what Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu is, I want the Jewish people not just to experience me. He says, Ba'avur Yishma ha'am bedaberi imach. I want the Jewish people to experience me speaking to you, Moses. Because once they experience me speaking to you, ve'rambecha ya'aminu le'olam. They will never, ever again have any doubt as to who you are, Moses. You are my messenger. You are my shaliach. But they have to know this. And the only way they will know this is if they experience it. So that's what's going to happen. So you see why it's so important. The next step, people say, okay, the Jewish people received an offer, they accepted it. That's it. Give us a Torah. He's not going to give us the Torah, because what would happen is today we wouldn't be studying the Torah. The reason today we're studying the Torah is because we have absolute, complete, 100% assurance that Moses received the Torah from God. And that's because of the experience that we're now reading, that Moshe Rabbeinu actually tells them, but you can't just experience God. And you understand that, right? You're not just going to, have this experience, because it doesn't work like that. The Pasuk says, V'kidashtam hayom. The Pasuk says you have to prepare the Jewish people, right? I'm going to give you 3 days to prepare, because on the third day, that's when the revelation is going to take place. So there's going to be they have to make tevilah, they have to purify themselves. They have to stand far away from the mountain. You can't just come close to the presence of God, right? And of course, there's going to be the law of al tigeshu el isha. You can't be with a woman for 3 days. So all this preparation is to allow the Jewish people to receive this revelation. And I want to explain to you something about this revelation. This revelation that the Jewish people receive in Sinai is a type of nevuah. It's a direct experience of God. So it's a nevuah. It's a prophecy. So now, for a prophet to experience prophecy is a very terrifying experience. So, but here's the thing. You see, a prophet is a prophet. So it may be a terrifying experience, and then Harambam says that it's so overwhelming that the prophet it can exhaust the prophet's strength and weaken him tremendously. But as I said, it's a prophet. So if you have a trained runner running a marathon, he'll make it, and at the end of 26 miles, will probably be exhausted, and it will be quite an experience. But he's a trained runner. The problem is that the Jewish people were not all prophets. So for the Jewish people to have this prophetic experience, it was very, very overwhelming. It was like a non-trained person somehow running the marathon and just finishing the 26 miles. And that's what the Chachamim say, the famous pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Nafshi Yase'a B'dabero. When God spoke to us, the neshamot of the Jewish people, parhu, literally left their bodies. And then there was a famous midrash that said that Hashem had to bring a special tal. And I'm just describing the midrash. I'm not explaining the midrash. So please understand the difference between relating what the midrash says, which is an allegory, and explaining the deeper meaning behind the allegory. I'm just describing the allegory so you can understand the significance, and maybe one day we'll study that also, what that midrash means. But nevertheless, the midrash says that the Jewish people literally died, parcha nishmatam, and that Hashem had to bring upon them the tal that's reserved for the days of Tehiyat HaMetim to bring them back to life. So what we learned from this midrash is that it was a very overwhelming experience. It was not a natural experience, and it was almost impossible for them to bear it. So they make this preparation, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells them to be prepared. And indeed, on the third day, Hashem reveals himself, and the Jewish people are there by the mountain, and the entire mountain is shaking and burning with fire. And they hear the kol shofar, they hear the sound of God, the voice of God, and it sounds something like the sound of a shofar, holech vechazek meod, which is becoming more and more powerful. And what they were hearing is they heard Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to God. But when God was answering Moses, it was like the sound of the shofar. Um, my father and I studied this quite a lot. There's a lot to say about what this means. But I think for the purposes of this class, I will just leave it at that. I will leave it that the voice of God sounded somehow like the shofar, and the Jewish people are experiencing this. And this was such a powerful experience that indeed nobody ever had doubts about Moses being the recipient of the Torah, because we heard God speaking to Moses, we heard Moses speaking to God, and we all understood what is taking place here. That is so important because this was a collective national experience. Right? Do you understand what that means? Everybody in the Jewish people experienced the same event at the same time in the same way. That is incredible. There are a few things in history that have been perceived like that. Yeah, just by way of contrast, and I'm not saying this to be critical, but for example, who experienced Jesus flying off the cross? It was actually one person. Her name was Mary Magdalena, and history relates who Mary Magdalena was. What was she doing in a tower? Why did women live in towers back then? The towers were the places where the soldiers would come. Why would a woman live in a migdal? That was her name, was Mary Magdalena. So, I guess you can maybe kind of infer certain things about her name regarding what her profession was. But nevertheless, she's a person and she had an experience. And if you believe her, you're free to choose, belief in that experience. But most people won't believe her. A lot of people see a lot of things, and it's not always true. It's, people have hallucinations or people even lie sometimes. There was a congresswoman who experienced a terrifying group of mob breaking into her office recently. I mean, it was a horrible experience. I'm not saying she was lying. No, I think she really experienced it. The only problem is the mob was in a different building. Her name was Alexandria Ocasio something Cortez, AOC she's known as. So she had this horrible experience. I'm not accusing her of lying at all. She experienced a mob. They were about to break down her door, and where is she and where is, the only thing is the mob wasn't in that building. So she had a horrible experience. So my point is that just because somebody experienced something doesn't mean that it necessarily took place. But here you have the experience of every single person in the Jewish nation hearing the voice of God and understanding it as the voice of God, and hearing God speaking to Moses. And I want to say something about this because it's really important, because just the other day I heard there was a discussion between a scientist and a rabbi, and I just forget, where did I hear this? I think it may have, no, I think, I forgot where it was. Okay, nevertheless. And the question was regarding, too bad there wasn't a tape recorder. If there was a tape recorder, then we could have all just recorded the voice of God. And I'm like, wow, you people just don't get it. And what do you think, that God has vocal cords and the vocal cords vibrate and they create waves and the waves travel through the air and they're received by somebody's ear? I mean, is that what you think the voice of God is? Is that the level? Is that the intellectual level? And I guess, yeah, that is the intellectual level. And people just don't get it. No, God is not a person. He's not physical. So the voice of God is not like, physical airwaves. I wonder if you had a tape recording, whether you would actually be able to hear the voice of God. I don't think so. No, you wouldn't. That's really important. So when you hear the voice of God, you understand that it's not, just a sound. Because it's just a sound. There's a lot of sources of sound. So why would you think it's the voice of God, right? So this was a very profound and intensely horrifying experience And it was universally experienced as an intensely horrifying experience. And people understood that this is their creator speaking to them. So that's the idea of what took place in this stage of the story of entering into the Berit. We're discussing how the Jewish people entered into the Berit with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the story. That's the subject, right? And now you see the different stages. And I want to go to the next stage because again, my goal here is to not to study each one of the Pesukim in a precise way, but rather to describe the unfolding of the story of the Berit. Okay, I want to. Okay, so now the Jewish people hear God speaking to Moses. They know Moses is the Shaliach. Good. What happens next? There's an interesting pasuk. Before I even read the pasuk, it's going to be the Ten Commandments. So now that the Jewish people entered into the, or accepted the terms of the Berit, they're going to get a sampling of the laws. They're going to get a sampling. Here's my question. Where was Moses when this took place? So most people say, yeah, Moses was up on the top of the mountain. And that's just not correct. Because Moses did go up to the top of the mountain to deliver to God the message. And then Moses goes back up to the top of the mountain because God wants to tell Moses, listen, the Jewish people are going too close to the mountain. Make them stand back. Otherwise, chas v'shalom, there's going to be a lot of death. You can't just, come into the presence of the Shekhinah just like that. So make them stand back. But then Moses, rather God speaks the 10 Commandments. And before God speaks the 10 Commandments, this is what happened. God gives Moses one last instruction, and it is as follows. Vayomer elav Adonai lechred. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, descend the mountain, right? Vayered Moshe el ha'am.
By the way, you don't have the split screen on. I don't know if you intended to.
No, I don't think it's necessary. I think because I'm just reciting, I'm saying the Pesukim and then I'm kind of explaining it. So I think it's
Right.
I think it's easier, and then Moses goes down, Vayered Moshe el ha'am, and when Moses goes down, he's eventually going to go back up because the pasuk says that he says ve'alita ata ve'aharon imach. You're going to go back up the mountain, but what happens before he goes back up the mountain? The pasuk says vayered Moshe la'am. Moses goes down. Vayomer alehem, and as Moses reaches the Jewish people, it's at that moment that God begins to speak the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue. Okay. Why is that so important? And it's as follows. It is a famous Gemara in Masechet Makot. Harambam brings this Gemara in the Sefer HaMisvot that the pasuk says Torah sibalanu Moshe, and the word Torah in Gematria is equal to 611. And the Gemara says, well, why does it say Torah sibalanu Moshe? It should have been Taryag, 613, and not Torah, right? So why does it say 611 were given by Moses? And the answer is because this is a derasha. I mean, it's not the Perashat of the pasuk. The Perashat of the pasuk is the word Torah means the law. One moment, please. And they say it was 611 mitzvot that were given by Moshe Rabbeinu because the first two Aseret HaDiberot, the first two Diberot, were heard directly by the people. The people experienced the voice of God directly, and they heard God speaking to them directly. That's why it's Torah Sivalanu 611 minus the first two, which were given from God to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the meaning of the word Anochi. Let me explain that word. I learned this from a good friend, a close friend of my father, Rabbi David Shlush, Alav Shalom, a great Chacham. He was the chief rabbi of Netanya for many, many decades, and one of the great, great hachamim in Eretz Yisrael. I used to visit my parents in Netanya a lot, and then Friday Shabbat, we would go to Harav Shlush's knis, and sometimes my father would speak, sometimes Harav Shlush would speak, and I remember this was Perashat Yitro, and Harav Shlush explained, what does it mean, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, Asher Hoseticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Bet Avadim? And for example, in Kriyat Shema, we say, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Asher Hoseticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Bet Avadim, Ani Adonai Elohechem Emet. The Emet is not part of the pasuk, but nevertheless, Ani. Ani means I am. Okay, so what does Anochi mean? Anochi means I am. So what's the difference between the word Ani and Anochi? That's like an important question. And it's a great question. So Ani is when the first person is speaking to an undefined group of people. I'm sorry, let me do it the other way around. I didn't like that at all. Anochi is a combination of two words. Ani lecha. I to you. Meaning, I, the first person, am speaking to you as an individual, specifically. I'm speaking specifically to you. Anochi, ani lecha. I'm speaking first person to second person, right? Whereas ani, I'm speaking to the entire people, right? So ani Adonai Elohechem in plural person. Asher hoseti etchem in plural. Me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim in plural. But Anochi Adonai Elohecha Asher hoseticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, singular. I'm speaking to you now as an individual. So every single Jew heard the voice of God speaking directly to them as the second person. It was the second person experiencing the speech of the first person. You understand that? That's why it was said, that's why God spoke it. He didn't want Moses to speak it to them. He wanted to speak it to them directly. So that's the first. So the next step that we're dealing with now, the Decalogue, is the description, a sampling of the law. It's not just a sampling of the law, but rather these 10 commandments, they represent a summary of the law. So that's important. The summary continues, and then it gives us a more precise, or rather not precise, a more descriptive statement of some of the principles of Jewish jurisprudence, the mishpatim. So after we have the Decalogue, which are general principles, we then have Perashat Mishpatim, which is a more specific description of laws. And there's a reason why it's Mishpatim. That's not the purpose of my class. Maybe next week, if we study Perashat Mishpatim, I will teach why the sampling that we bring is from Perashat Mishpatim. That is an interesting question, but Perashat Mishpatim contains the laws of the slaves. It contains the laws of bailments. It contains the laws of tort law, various tort law, and other laws of that nature. Why does it start with that? Great question. Not for purposes of this class. Now we come to the final step. Let me explain to you what the final step is. We had the offer, we had the acceptance, we had God revealing himself to the Jewish people so that the Jewish people have full confidence in the fact that Moses is the real shaliach of God, so that they know what Moses tells them is really the Torah and not, some chas v'shalom, some person who's not describing things precisely, right? And then we had the sampling of the law, right? Because we're entering into the law, so we have to hear what is it about. And now we finally have the last step. The last step is the ratification of the berit. Okay, I want to explain to you what I mean by ratification. Sometimes you can have a contract, and the contract can be voided, even though it's signed, right? So it needs to be ratified. Let me give you an example of what it means by ratification. You can technically amend the Constitution of the United States. You need to have the states need to agree to the amendment. I don't remember what it is. I believe it's 2/3 of the state have to agree to amend the Constitution. So what happens if that takes place? So you have the states, and they would sign the amendment. They sign the amendment. They say, okay, they signed the amendment. That's it. Let's say 2/3 of the state signed the amendment to the Constitution. That's it. It's over. No, it's not over. After the states sign the amendment to the Constitution, then they need to ratify that amendment. So until the point of ratification, they can still technically say, you know what, we don't want to do this. And the ratification is done by Congress, right? So the state bodies, they sign the amendment, and then the states through the Congress, through the House of Representatives and Senate, they ratify the amendment. That seals the deal. Well, let me give you a similar thing with the actual Constitution. The Constitution was entered into, or would have been entered into, there was a 3-month debate in 1787. After 3 months, 38 of 41 delegates signed it. So that's it. It's over, right? They signed it. 38 out of 41 delegates signed it. So it's over. No, it's not over. Because Article 7 of the Constitution stated that 9 out of 13 states must ratify it. Back then it was 13 states. You understand that, right? So back then it was 13 states. So that's before the Louisiana Purchase and the folly of purchasing Alaska and all that fun stuff. So what happened? That took until 1788. And until the Constitution was ratified, it wasn't accepted. It wasn't legally binding. After it was signed by the state, 1787, and then ratified, 1788, the ratification seals the deal. It becomes a legally binding document. The ratification of the Berit between the Jewish people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes place at the end of Perashat Mishpatim. What happens at the end of Perashat Mishpatim is Moshe Rabbeinu, the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu builds an altar under the mountain, and I want to read to you what my father, how my father describes this in the Horizontal Society, because I think it's a fantastic description. For those of you who have the Horizontal Society, it's on page 49. For those of you who don't have the Horizontal Society, I recommend you buy it, but I think it's out of print. So we're working on trying to reprint some of my father's works. I don't know if it's available, you can try. But here goes. The following morning, the pact was ratified. Moses ordered the erection of 12 pillars representing the tribes of Israel and an altar representing God. I'm going to read to you the pasuk. The pasuk is Vayashkem baboker vayiven mizbeach tachat hahal. That's the altar representing God. Ushtem esrei maseva lishtem asar shebtei Yisrael. And then you have the 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes of the Jewish people. So you see that? So that's what's being described here. Let me continue reading. Then Moses sent young men to offer sacrifices on the Mizbeach. They bring korbanot. Half of the blood of the sacrifices was poured into basins, and the rest was sprinkled onto the altar. So whenever you bring a korban, you do zerikat hadam ala Mizbeach. That was done in this case. Thereupon, Moses proceeded to read to the people the book of the Berit, because he wrote the night before, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Sefer HaBerit, and now he reads it to them. This is a form, like almost like reading the U.S. Constitution before the states, so that they can ratify it. They read it, and then you have that.
How do we define the Sefer HaBerit here?
I'm sorry?
What constitutes Sefer HaBerit?
He probably wrote the book of the 10 Commandments, the Aseret Deberot, and the Perashat Mishpatim. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a good question, by the way. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. At this ceremony, God is conspicuously absent. The morning is quiet. There is no thunder, lightning, or anything that could coerce, frighten, or insinuate the people. So you remember at the beginning when the Berit was offered to the Jewish people? Silence, quiet. God is dissimulated. Here, when it comes time to ratify the Berit, same thing. Quiet. God is dissimulated. Again, there's no coercion, right? And what do the people? What did the people say? Everything that God will tell us, we shall execute, and we shall hear the famous statement, "Naaseh v'nishma." And what was the formal act of ratification? It is as follows: Moses took the rest of the blood and sprinkled it on the people, saying, "Behold, the blood of the Berit that God made with you," on all these words. And I'm reading you the pasuk, ויקח משה את הדם, ויזרוק על העם, ויאמר, הנה דם הברית אשר כרת אדוני עמכם על כל הדברים האלה. And that was the formal ratification of the Berit. Gentlemen, this is what makes us a nation. The nation of Israel is a nation that is constituted through the covenant between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the basis. People say, why should I follow the Torah? It's not because you have to be devoted. You should be devoted. I'm not against devotion, by the way. I don't want anybody to miss out. But that's not the reason. The reason we must follow the Torah is because we're legally obligated to follow the Torah. It's that simple. And a person says, well, no, I don't want to do it. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to, we're not going to force you. I mean, you can do whatever you want. You become, I don't know, go to communist China, become a commie. I mean, what can I say? You can do anything you want. Nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. It's like this, there's always this thing, yeah, but what if somebody says he doesn't want to? Okay, I guess. I mean, geez, like do whatever you want to do, right? But the point being that this is the basis. We are a nation, we have our laws, and if you want to live in a nation, you have to abide by the laws of that nation. And if you say, I don't want to abide by the laws of the nation, so leave. I mean, go somewhere else, do something else with your life, go to some, I don't know, South Pacific island, I don't know what. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful places in the world. But the point being, you can't say, I'm a Jew because I was born a Jew, whatever that means. No, you're a Jew because you follow the laws of the nation of the Jewish people. The same way I'm an American because I follow the laws of the United States of America. If somebody decided, I don't want to follow the laws of the United States, okay, I mean, but don't live in America. I mean, maybe you should go somewhere else, right? At that point, find a nation you like and go for it, right? You got to be consistent. You have to have integrity. All right, so that's the idea of the Berit. The idea of the Berit is so important, right? This is so important. This is what makes us who we are. And I have to say, I think one of the problems in Israel is that the Jewish people have not found themselves. I mean, we found the land, which is great. I love Israel. I mean, man, boy, do I need a good coffee in our cafe. I mean, a good cappuccino or macchiato. I mean, like, I cannot find it in this country. It's just the truth. Okay, so I love Israel. I love everything about it. But like, come on, like, what are we doing? Like, you don't believe in the Torah. You don't think that the Torah is like should form the laws of the nation of Israel. So what makes you Jewish? I mean, like, what? Because you have what? Because you have nice technology. It's great. Technology is wonderful. Nothing against technology, but that's not what makes us Jewish. That's not what our history is about. That's not what our nation is about, right? So we have to rediscover this idea. It's an idea that has to be rediscovered. There's a lot to be written about this, and maybe if God gives me the opportunity and the strength, I will write some things about this, because I have a lot of my father's unwritten works, and I can probably gather together a nice amount of information to write more about this subject. But it's interesting, my father's first article was in the Journal of Tradition. I think it was 1966 or 1964, I don't remember. And his first article was actually Understanding the Covenant. That was the first article he ever published in English, which was about the covenant, about the Berit, and he describes this at great length. So if you want to study more about the subject, you can read that article. That article is probably more easily obtainable, or you can send me a private email. I can send you a link to the article that I have from the Journal of Tradition, and then you can read it and study more about it. But this is it. This is the most fundamental thing that we as Jews need to understand. It is the most fundamental thing that the Jewish nation needs to rediscover. We need to rediscover the Berit and institute the Berit as the defining legal document of the Jewish people. In 1788, the Americans ratified the Constitution. I wonder what year the Jewish people will re-ratify the Berit, the Torah, as our law. If there's any questions, I can accept them now, because there's still about 3 minutes.
Well, I'll just ask, just because you use this word re-ratify, would we say that during the time of Purim, we re-ratified the Torah? Because don't they say they recommitted themselves to the Torah and so on? Isn't that the concept?
Right, because when the Jewish people were exiled by the Babylonians in the days of destruction of the first Commonwealth by Nebuchadnezzar, many Jews gave up hope, and they thought that it was over, and And even Daniel himself, he didn't give a pope, but he made a certain calculation, because the calculation was that the Geulah was supposed to take place 70 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, and there was a certain confusion regarding how to count the 70 years. So a lot of Jews gave a pope. Daniel didn't give a pope. He was just confused about the calculation, but he didn't give a pope. And a lot of Jews thought it was over. And then when Haman came and he wanted to physically להשמיד, להרוג ולאבד את כל היהודים מנער ועד זקן, טף ונשים ביום אחד, ב13 בחודש 12 ובחודש אדר, when he wanted to destroy all the Jewish people physically, people, they thought it was over. So when the miracle of Purim took place, and we sort of reorganized ourselves as a nation, we, in a sense, we re-ratified the Berit, understanding that it is the governing legal document of the Jewish people. Yes, we did that. And I think we need to do that again. Like right now we have different laws. If you go to Israel, you have the British law, you have the, you have the Ottoman law, you have the, the Ming Dynasty law. I mean, you have all these weird laws, and supposedly they're all better than the Torah, because, the Torah is like, that's like, no, that's not good. The Ottoman laws are just so much better. I mean, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey is like, so, okay, I mean, fair enough. But the point is, we have to re-ratify the Berit. I think it would make us happier people.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, always a pleasure. Shabbat shalom, and I'll hopefully see you, Belina, next
Rav,
week.
I just thought I'd mention I purchased a soft cover of Horizontal Society. I got it a couple of months ago.
Oh wow, nice.
New, so.
Where are you? You're from New Zealand?
Yeah. I'm from a small South Pacific island. So.
Okay. I think it's really beautiful there. I got to tell you, like, I'm like, bring me along, Okay, very nice. I'm happy you had that copy. And if anybody else can find the Horizontal Society, you're all welcome to buy it, because it's a great book. So I hope you enjoy that book. Thank you for showing it to me. Okay.
Bye, shalom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shabbat
Chazak
shalom.
Baruch.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.